Welcome to the Filipino American Women Project, a podcast show that shares stories and life lessons told by individuals living or have lived in America that are of Filipino descent and identify as female. I'm your host, Jen Amos, a fellow Filipino American woman, and I'm excited for you to join us. Let's get started. All right. Hi, everyone. Jen Amos here, your host for the Filipino American Women Project. And I have a surprise today. I have a co-host with me, Nani Dominguez. Nani, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hello.
Yes. And why don't you tell everyone just briefly how we met and then how you ended up being on the show today?
So hi, everyone. I'm Nani. I connected with Jen on Instagram, just like a lot of other Filipino Americans that I see going through some sort of identity crisis or personal transformation and just looking to connect with and learn about their heritage and their roots, whether they're full, half, a quarter, what have you. And I'm just here to offer a different perspective from someone who's maybe not ready to share my story yet because I feel like I'm mid-crisis still. And I don't really have any life lessons to give. I'm the one who needs the life lessons. So yes, that's why I'm here. And thank you, Jen, for having me.
Yes, it's my absolute pleasure. And just like what Nani said, we just met on Instagram literally a couple of days ago and we spoke on the phone and it just seemed right to bring her on. And I'm just really excited to see what will come of this and see what I learned from you and what you learned from this experience. So I just want to thank you again for deciding to jump into this. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if you were expecting this to happen when we were going to talk, but here we are.
Not at all.
Yeah, like 48 hours later, you're on an interview with us.
Yeah,
so
that's fine. I'm into it.
Yes, yeah, awesome. Well, I am really excited. We have an amazing woman that we are interviewing today, and so I'm just going to dive in and introduce her. So Ria Pretekin is an educator, a coach, and a counselor. Ria, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jen, and nice to meet you over the phone, Nani. So I'm excited to have both of you interviewing me today.
Yes,
well, thank you.
Yeah, we're super excited. Why don't you start by sharing with everyone how you heard about the Filipino American Women Project? I know we already talked about this prior to the call, but I thought it was really interesting and very relatable why you decided to and talking about Filipino history and how you've been able to find Filipino history lately.
Yeah, so I like many people have mentioned, and Nani just mentioned that I found the Filipino American Women Project through Instagram. And that's where I found, Filipino Women on the Rise and Entrepreneurship and the Tagalog Project, Read Filipino, all these other accounts that I have grown to know and love and follow. And I've just been taking in a lot of that content and learning more about Filipino American history, more about myself, because it's not really told anywhere else. And so I find myself learning so much about our culture through Instagram and through the stories that are being shared there on that social media platform, which is like really just really unexpected. And that's how I came across the Filipino American Women Project. So I'm so happy to hear other stories and have been listening to the podcast. And so it just adds on to the content that I'm seeing on Instagram.
Yeah, I love how you said that. And let's see, this project, the Filipino American Women Project, started back in December 2016. This was a couple of days after Christmas, and I forgot exactly how I was inspired or how the idea came about. But I remember trying to Google Filipino American women. And I won't spoil anything. I guess I can encourage our listeners to look it up themselves. But at the time, I didn't really find a lot of positive things about us. and at the time I had run an online marketing agency, and I just thought, I'm a millennial, and the generation after me, they're gonna grow up with phones in their hands, and their phone is gonna be their number one teacher. There was a generation where kids would learn from television, but now kids are learning from their phone. And I just thought, I don't have kids yet, but if or when I do, I want to be able to be the change that I want to see, and be able to provide accessible information about us. And so at the time, it just made a lot of sense to do Facebook Live, because at the time it was becoming popular, and I knew it was going to be a great way to get easy organic reach and all these things. And so I think it's really cool how today it wasn't just me who felt like they needed to learn about their culture, or even put it out, put out that search, or put the search out there to learn through social media. And, lately my favorite Instagram account, this is a shout out to Anna Marie Cruz with Entrepreneurship. I love following her accounts. We actually interviewed her recently as well. So if you want
Yes, I listened to that one.
Yeah. So if everyone wants to listen to that, I believe that's episode 4, little plug in there. And I love seeing her post, because she really gets into the history of things. And it's kind of like my daily dose of Filipino history. So I just, yes. So Anna, if you're listening to this, I'm gonna have to tag her in a post later. But yeah, so thank you, Ria. I'm glad that you shared that, because I think it's really relatable. And if this is what we're doing, imagine what the future generation is going to be doing. Anyway, Ria, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what makes you, why you identify as a Filipino American woman today?
Yeah, so I was originally from Los Angeles. I've been out here in the Midwest, in the city of Chicago, for about 11 years now. And I actually grew up in historic Filipinotown, and it wasn't called Hi-Fi back then, but and probably for the first few years of my life before moving to West Covina, which is another area with a lot of Filipino community, and then Walnut, California, before moving out here to Chicago. And so it's interesting to think about the context of where you grew up and where you live. And back then, I didn't really have to think about what it meant to be Filipino American, because I knew so many Filipino Americans. There was a seafood city in our neighborhood. There was, Manila Sunset, Red Ribbon, all these Filipino bakeries and restaurants. And then as an adult, it's really when I had to confront what it meant to be Filipino American, and kind of feeling embarrassed that I didn't really know what that meant in a context where there weren't a lot of Filipinos. And it's the Midwest, so it's predominantly white and Black and Latinx. And that's where I've really had to discover what that means. And I'm identified as being Filipino American because both my parents were born and raised in the Philippines. My maternal grandfather served in the U.S. Navy, and he became a naturalized U.S. citizen at that time. So his children automatically became U.S. citizens, and that's what brought my mother to Los Angeles. And then it's here in my work as a counselor in Chicago public schools, and then now as a coach at the Network for College Success, that I've had to really define what it means to be Filipino American. And I actually haven't been able to really hone in on what that means. And it was on a recent trip to the Philippines that I was starting to explore what that means to me and what that would mean for my children growing up.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I fairly grew up I was basically raised around my relatives, and in high school, I had a fairly diverse group of classmates and stuff. And it was really kind of what you said. It was really in my adult life. When I was in college, I wasn't put in the middle of white America or anything, but I was part of this Filipino organization. And it was the first time I really didn't realize I didn't know much about my Filipino heritage. I learned about what was that march called? You both know what I'm talking about. It's for the veterans.
Ooh,
Oh,
I
I don't
forgot.
even know.
It's
you're
called.
embarrassing us.
Yeah.
It's
Let me
called
Google.
We're not good Filipinas.
yeah. Oh, I remember. Okay, I remember. It was the JFAV March, and I believe it was Justice for Filipino American Veterans. Okay, so these are the yeah. I remember now because my grandpa was actually a veteran in World War II. He fought. I don't know if he was on the American side or the Filipino side. I forgot. Hi, everyone. Jen Amos here. I just have to interject at this point because I wouldn't be doing my grandpa and his brother any justice if I didn't do a little research and tell you a little bit part of my family story during World War II. and so in the moment of talking to these ladies, I completely forgot. So as I edit this, I thought I'm just going to slip this in here. So anyway, in case you've never heard of JFAV, which is an acronym for Justice for Filipino American Veterans, JFAV is a national alliance of Filipino veterans and organizations and other advocates in which every year they would do a march to serve as a reminder to ensure that the sacrifices made by Filipinos during World War II weren't forgotten. As I have mentioned in this interview, my grandpa actually served in World War II. And I also wanted to add that my grandpa's brother actually passed away during the Bataan Death March, which took place in 1942 during World War II as well. I'm not a historian in any way, but if you want to learn more about these times, then I recommend that you go online or whatever you do to learn more. But just a little background, both of my grandparents were involved during World War II. And that's a little bit about what we were discussing. And when I was in college, it didn't dawn to me that my grandpa hadn't received his benefits after serving in World War II for a very long time. And lucky today, he is 92, but it was really only, I think, almost a decade ago, if not recently, that he finally received a lump sum for having served in the American military. So highly recommend, if you don't know much about this, the injustice that took place for the Filipinos that fought on the side of America and fought as the American military. Highly recommend that you look into it. And it's a part of my family story that even I myself am still learning, which is why I'm sort of stumbling learning about this. And I highly encourage that you read more into it if you're interested. All right, back to the interview. But anyway, I remember in college, I remember my friends were so passionate about, Filipino justice and our rights and everything. And I felt so disconnected because I really didn't know that I had to be a proud Filipino. It's not like I was embarrassed. I just wasn't aware. And so I think it's interesting how, you were in that community, which I didn't know Historic Filipinotown was known as Hi-Fi for short, by the way. So that's a new, I'm hearing that for the first time as well. And my only reference to West Covina is Crazy Ex-Girlfriend on, which I was watching Netflix.
Someone did tell me about that.
Yeah, where the star, like the main guy, is Filipino. And I was like, yes. But anyway, I think it is kind of interesting how we think our lives are so normal until we're put into a position where it's like, oh, I'm different, and people are asking me why I'm different, and I have to explain myself about that. And so, Nani, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that as well before we have Ria chime back in.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a split household. My parents were divorced. My dad is Filipino American. He was born in the Philippines, and my mom is Russian American. So I grew up very confused, culturally, just two very different households. And I've always felt kind of that difference that you say. And Ria, I'd actually love to hear more about your trip to the Philippines, because in my kind of whatever this is that I'm going through right now, I've been
Mhm.
feeling some weird kind of pull to go there and to take a trip there and to, not go to the pretty beaches and everything, but actually explore the islands and learn about the culture and do a similar sort of exploration trip like you were explaining. My only problem is that I can't find anyone to go with me. That's not something that you can ask anyone to go with you to do. But I find that kind of disconnect with my family and that they're not interested in doing that kind of thing. And I am. So I'm, happy that I'm able to connect with people this way that are kind of doing the same thing. And that's really helped me a lot so far.
Yeah, the trip that I went on in 2016, actually, I went with my daughter was 3, and my husband and my family, and we went to a historical tour with a political activist, Carlos Celdran. We were in Intramuros in Manila, and we were standing inside a bomb shelter, and that's when I really learned a lot about the Philippines' role in World War II. And you hear so much about Japan and America and Pearl Harbor and all that. And I was like, they did not mention the Philippines when I was reading about history, and
right.
big role to play. And just referencing back to the growing up in a Filipino community, although I was in that community, we didn't really talk about what it meant to be Filipino, because I remember I'd always walk past this bust of Jose Rizal going into Seafood City. It was like in the parking lot before Seafood. It was just random, right? And I didn't know who he was really. I didn't learn about him in American history. And it was only really until that recent trip to the Philippines that I learned more about Jose Rizal. And it's things like that. Like, although I was seeing it all the time, I didn't really know what that meant and who he was.
Right.
What he meant.
You don't understand the weight of it until you're there. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And that's exactly what I'm kind of like itching to do right now.
Yeah. It was definitely a transformative experience to just like be there in this place with so much history.
I went on a trip to the Philippines a couple of years ago with a bunch of community leaders in San Diego at the time. And I remember it was, oh my gosh, I'm totally drawing a blank right now. This was years ago. This was years ago already. But essentially what we did, it was the first time I went to the Philippines without my family. I would usually go with my family. And it was just, a bunch of community leaders like successful Filipino business owners and some and like I think 2 college students, and we all decided to go there together. Okay, hi everyone. I wanted to cut in once again to get into a little more detail and background about this trip I went on. I actually had to do some research because it's been some time now. Back in 2014, I went with some awesome people from San Diego. Shout out to Aaron, Savannah, Kuya Rico, DJ, Kuya Tony, Ate, Sherry, and Al, amongst other people. This was shortly after Typhoon Haiyan, also known as Typhoon Yolanda. Feel free to look that up. Just hit the Philippines. This was back in 2014. And Savannah and Aaron were college students at the time. And I had already been an alumni of San Diego State. But we had been invited and sponsored to travel with Gaiwad Kalinga, which is also known as GK for short. And if you've never heard of GK before, their core activities relate to long-term improvement in the housing and community building for and by every poor Filipino who have historically lived in slums. So our main goal going to the Philippines was to build homes, especially the homes that we had already built that were damaged by the typhoon. This was a 9-day trip with some amazing people. If you're interested in learning more about Gaiwad Kalinga, or GK for short, you can just visit their website at gkoneworld.com. All right, so now I'm gonna jump right back into the interview to share a little more details about my trip. And we were able to get a tour. We were doing some missionary work, but in between all that, we were getting a tour of the best as well as the worst of the Philippines. And after having gone through that experience, one of the experiences that really hit me, there's 2 of them, but one of them was going to a cemetery and seeing families having built homes around the cemetery because it was like cheap land, if not, free land. And they were just, that was just their normal. And you see all these kids running around and they're the happiest kids in the world. Like they could care less about where they live.
Right.
Yeah. And so there was that. And then the second one was, this was after the hurricane that had, I think is it called, I never know the difference between a typhoon or a hurricane, but I believe it was Hurricane Yolanda. Someone please correct me if I have it wrong. We were visiting this lady's house, and when we came in, we had to duck our head because the roof was really low. And it turned out that the hurricane blew off like her second floor, like her entire second floor. And we were able to ask her questions, and we had a translator because I don't speak Tagalog, unfortunately. I remember asking her through the translator, I said, "Do you have house insurance? Do you have like something to help pay for this?" And she's like, "No." And that was a big moment for me to think, wow, like in certain places in the Philippines, once you lose, a big part of your, whatever you own, you don't have such things as insurance to get it back. And it got me to realize that my family really came from like a middle class. Like they didn't have the prettiest looking houses, but they were farmers. They owned land and property. At the time, I thought that wasn't considered like, good. And so, but I having gone through that experience of seeing the best and the worst of the Philippines, it made me appreciate like my family a lot more. So Nani, I think it would be super awesome for you to go to the Philippines, however you go. And I know there were some programs out there, which I'm happy to, actually, that's a good thing to take note of inviting people who host those programs to get interviewed on the show. and invite people to be a part of that. So that's just totally came up with an idea for me. So thank you for that, Nani.
Of course.
So I want to go back to Ria. So Ria, you mentioned that it was really in your adult life where you had to learn who you were as a Filipino. Can you tell us a little more about that? Like why you had to do that?
I think two things: becoming a mother and helping my children kind of facilitate their own identity development and helping them think about who they are and what ethnicity they are. And the other would be that for work at the University of Chicago, where I work at the Network for College Success, we do a lot of work around equity and transforming public schools into equitable spaces. And that requires us to look within and explore the skin that we're in. And so we have to write these equity stances that we're like always fine tuning. And it's a living, breathing document that we work on. And then we display it within our organization to explain like what we stand for, who we are, kind of like what's our background, and what basically the answer is like, what's the skin that I'm in? And I had such a hard time writing it because I'm Filipino American, and I'm just like, okay, well, how do I add more to this? What
does that mean?
Yeah, it's got to be more than one sentence. But and why do I identify as Filipino American? What does that mean? And I've been there for 6 years now, and it's like an ongoing identity exploration to figure out like my own childhood experiences in education, and to now discover what it means to be a Filipino American mom raising biracial children. And not only are they biracial, but we're interfaith. I grew up Catholic, and my husband is Jewish American. And so to think about all those different intersections of religion and race, and then also the geography of like living in the Midwest versus the West Coast, where that's predominantly where Filipino communities are.
Oh man. All right, Jen Amos here, jumping into the middle of our show, as I always do, to remind you why this show is possible. So, at the end of every episode, I tend to say, if you didn't catch our guest contact info, don't worry, we'll have those in the show notes. Check them out. I worked so hard on them. You're welcome. Well, it's been brought to my attention that our show notes are not as easy to find as I thought, which is why starting summer 2020, the Filipino American Women Project is proud to be partnering with Captivate, the world's only growth-oriented podcast host. Captivate is created for independent podcasters, designed from day one to help you to focus on audience growth and the expansion of your audio influence. One way that Captivate makes our lives easier as independent podcasters is by taking the guesswork out of making a website for your show. That's right, a website for your show. So listeners, starting summer 2020, finding our show notes will be so much easier. All thanks to Captivate. You're welcome, as always. If you're about to start podcasting or are getting burnt out from all the extra work of producing one, like building a website, consider a 7-day free trial, that's right, free, with Captivate by visiting thefil-am-woman.com. That's the Fil-Am, short for Filipino American woman.com. Or, check out our show notes in the meantime, which is in the details section of each episode. Once again, you can visit thefil-am-woman.com or visit the details section of this episode. This reminds me of a conversation, an interview I had like 2 years ago. I forgot who it was with specifically, but I started kind of repeating it every episode after that. And I feel like the beautiful thing about having Filipino descent is because it could be mixed with so many things. Essentially, that's what we've come to find, and what's very normal, like interracial marriages and being a mestiza, like Nani here, and so with everything you just listed, Ria, like Catholic, Jewish, Midwest, all these things. I feel like for your kids, I feel like you have blessed them with this huge library. You have the Filipino section, you have the Jewish Catholic section, you have the Chicago culture, you'll have the LA culture. And I feel like it'll be up to your kids to decide like what books will they take off of those shelves and define themselves essentially. But knowing that they can always switch it up if they want to. Yeah. And so I'm just curious, like you have 2 kids, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And so how are you teaching them now? And I believe they're young kids, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what are you doing now that you feel like is working for your kids?
People I think wonder if it confuses them that I'm exposing them to so much, like not only just Filipino culture, but I want them to know that there's lots of other cultures. So that there is a whole world out there, and not only exposing them to Jewish and Catholic religions, but lots of other religions as well, because to narrow it down to only what we know would just kind of do them a disservice to not know that there's a whole world of other beautiful cultures and religions that we may not participate in, but that exist. And I think about like my worst fear as they grow up into adults would be for them to not say that they were Filipino American, or that they were, to just say like, oh, my mom's Filipino, but I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
That would make me really sad to think that I didn't provide enough experience or exposure to the Filipino culture for them. And realizing that there isn't a lot of that, especially in the city of Chicago. I think if I were in the suburbs, there are definitely more Filipinos in the suburban communities, but there isn't a lot of Filipinos that I run into. And so we can't just go to Filipino restaurants down the street. And I think that more than just like the food, but the cultural experiences and growing up in the Midwest for them, I think it's going to be even more important for me to provide that community and that knowledge for them and exposure. Mm-hmm. Luckily, I've been able to take my daughter twice to the Philippines already. However, my son, who just turned 2, I'm just a little worried about the 20-hour flight. So I'm but I really would like to. Luckily, my parents, they live with us, and they're exposing parts of that Filipino culture just in our everyday life, that my parents live with us, and we're a multi-generational family, which is already like not the norm in American households. And that my parents are very much involved in their lives, and they go to church religiously every Sunday. And so they get exposed to all these things that are part of Filipino culture. And then the food that my dad loves to cook, and he cooks Filipino food for dinner. And so I think all of that I'm trying to ensure that they know what it means, so that they can grow up and hopefully identify as being part Filipino American.
Yeah. Nani, I heard you agreeing a lot. Did you want to add to that?
I know. I was like, oh, wow, I caught myself doing that too. But no, you were speaking to a lot of what I feel kind of on the other end. I really appreciate your desire to provide that kind of background for your kids, because that's something that I often in these kind of recent months get frustrated a lot with my parents and grandparents, because I also grew up in like I said, a split household, which was, different cultures, different religions. My dad's family was obviously very Catholic and my mom's family was very atheist. So that also put me in a very confusing circumstance growing up. I also created my blog a long time ago for that exact reason, to kind of create a library of my experience and my, documenting me figuring this whole thing out, so that hopefully they can learn from those lessons later. And I don't have kids. This is totally like my whatever you call it, obsessive compulsive disorder or anxiety, where I just worry about things that don't even apply to me. But that is something that I think about a lot, because it is important to explain things to your kids in an interfaith, multicultural family, or what have you. So I appreciate that.
Thanks.
It sounds like to me the common, I believe if there is a Filipino American culture, because I think it's just open to interpretation, but I feel like the commonality amongst a lot of us is exploration of who we are. Because we do kind of come from a very messy background, like getting colonized for a couple centuries and, and everything. So to me, it's very reassuring, because, my neighbors, I live in a very, like a white dominated community right now. And when I first met my neighbors, the first thing they ask is, what are you, or where are you from? Because, I'm dark skinned and everything. And, I could say something clever like, oh, I'm from San Diego.
Yeah.
I could say something like
answer.
that. Like, oh, I'm human. I'm from
right.
my mother, like you.
Right.
No, but I knew what they were asking, and I let them know that like I was Filipino, and it's just interesting to be put into that situation, but I also think it's a good motivation to be like, like I should learn about myself, because other than me saying I'm Filipino, like that's kind of like the extent of what I know. Being Filipino is just saying I'm Filipino. My parents are immigrant parents and they're Filipino. But you ask me about my culture, you ask me about, technically I'm 3 ethnicities. I'm like, or I should speak like 3 dialects, Kapampangan, Ilocano, and Tagalog. I'm supposed to know all 3 of those. I know none. and yet I've come to a place where I'm like, that's okay, because like who I am and how I am is part of it. It contributes to the overall Filipino American experience, because it's complicated, and we all are, different generations, and just hearing both of you share your story, and the commonality of like, yeah, I don't know much about my background or my heritage. It's very reassuring and really affirms that this is part of the experience. So awesome. I do have a question for you, Ria. It sounds like you're doing a lot for your kids. You're very self-aware about like the different layers and dimensions to who you are and your husband and where you currently live. Do you feel like it's almost a burden to be that educator to your kids, even to represent yourself? Like I wouldn't be surprised if people ask you the same questions too, like, what are you? Where are you from? Do you feel like that's a burden, or more of like, I'm proud, like this is my responsibility?
I think it's kind of exhausting to always be seen as like this like perpetual foreigner, no matter where I go. If it's well, except for Los Angeles, and I guess I am kind of sassy because I do say like, oh, I'm from Los Angeles, and then I'm like, people, they're still like, but where are you really from? And well, I was born and raised in Los Angeles. No, then it's, well, my parents were born in the Philippines, so I am, my ethnicity is Filipino American, and it gets kind of exhausting to always feel like, people are wondering who I am. And it was actually interesting because we were spending time in my husband's family's lake house in a small town of Wisconsin, and my daughter was playing in the playground. So it's all white people. And I was I was chasing my son around, and I see her talking to two little girls. And so I'm like, well, I'm listening on their conversation. And one of the little girls is asking my daughter, are you Chinese? Or are you Japanese? And she's like, oh, no, I speak Japanese, which she was in a Japanese immersion school. So it like further confuses her. And then she's like, well, so the girl's like, okay, that's like not the answer I wanted. Right. So then she's like, well, is your mom Chinese or Japanese? And then she's like, no, but my friend's mom is Japanese. And so she's like, it's funny to hear this, my 6-year-old have this conversation and not realizing that people are wondering what she is. And then so I come over and intervene. I'm like, Bella, she's asking what you are. And she says, oh, I'm half Filipino, half white. And a lot of my family is from the Philippines. And so it's just like so matter of fact that it just like made me kind of giggle in the moment that like, at least she does know who she is, but it was funny that she didn't know why people were asking her that. And right. So I think it's something I've definitely gotten used to, that people are always wondering where I'm from. But I think it's also empowering for me to be able to own and develop my own story and develop that with my children and my family, so that instead of having someone tell my story or make assumptions about who we are, it's kind of empowering as an adult to reconnect with my cultural roots and to go back to the Philippines now as an adult and to discover what that means. And I think at the time of like growing up in Los Angeles in the 80s, it was all about assimilation, and for my parents to assimilate to American culture and for us to fit in and to blend in. And I think that's also what was taught in schools. And so I used to speak Tagalog, and now I can only understand it. But my parents said that, I can't remember which teacher it was, but a teacher said that they should speak to me in English instead of speaking to me in Tagalog, so that I would learn to speak English, I guess, or that I would be speaking that at home instead of our language of Tagalog. And so I think that back then it was really about assimilating. And now as an adult and in this generation, it's about like feeling empowered to know where you're from and your cultural roots and to be able to pass that down.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful and very well said. And I feel like culturally, it's becoming more popular to represent where you're from and be proud of, I feel like nowadays people are, maybe it's because of Instagram, but I feel like more people are just accepting their bodies for what they are, a lot of body positive messages out there. And I think there's no better time to, celebrate our roots, however much we know about it, than ever before. So I think that's really awesome. Nani, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Not too much. You covered a lot of it. I definitely have gotten that question my entire life, everywhere I go. And for me, it's always a really overwhelming experience because I've had to, most people, when you see me, you just think that I'm white and you write me off as that. But there have been instances like when I get my nails done and the nail ladies will be looking at me and they'll be like, what's your ethnicity? And I'll tell them Russian and Filipino. And they'll be like, Filipina? No, maybe Korean, maybe Japanese. Like I'll literally have to pull out pictures and show them pictures of my family. Like, no, I'm Filipina. And it's just kind of always a battle for me to defend that, I guess, which is tiring, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And to feel like you're maybe like not Filipino enough, or you're, like
right.
American, and like the fact that we can't speak the language fluently, or, those kind of things that like we weren't born there. And so does that make us less,
right. Right, exactly. It's kind of like that experience is taken away from you, from a stranger that doesn't even know you. And yeah, it's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. And it's, I'm sure there's a reason for this. I feel like one day it's going to make sense why we have to keep explaining ourselves, no matter where we go. Until then, I applaud you both for your resiliency and, even because of this experience, it's like the catalyst for us to really want to learn who we are, since people are asking us anyway.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so I love it. All right, so I want to go ahead and shift gears and talk. One of the reasons why we have this project is because we want to be able to publish a book where we share life lessons and stories told by the Filipino American woman. And so, Ria, you had mentioned in your questionnaire that motherhood has been a huge life lesson for you. And so I'd love to hear why you have chosen to share, your experience of motherhood as a life lesson for today.
Yes, I think motherhood is like really the one role and job that I've taken on that has really helped me discover my own identity and discover my own strength and resiliency. And it's so tied into who I am culturally, because I started out in motherhood. I basically started out as a single mother because I was in a marriage that was like pretty terrible, and the Catholic guilt and the fact that there was a divorce in the Philippines, and so in the Filipino community that's not really acceptable, I guess. That
Yeah.
I stayed in this marriage for far too long, and it was really in the hospital room when I had my daughter, the day I became mother, and I'm realizing that like to be a mother and to be fully present for her, I had to like really find my own joy and find a way to like live my life fully so that I could be fully present for her. And that's where I found my strength to find who I was, like, amidst all these like really complex emotions of like sadness and like kind of like just like not knowing who I was. And fast forward to today, I'm in a happy marriage for almost 3 years now, and
wow.
2 kids. Yeah. And now I know what it means to be in like a partnership, a true partnership with someone who is like there for you and you want to be there for them. And I wouldn't have ever found where I am today, and like where I feel like I'm in a really good place, like in my career and in my family life and my personal life, is because of the journey I've had to take as a mother. And as I think about like telling our stories, at the time I was like very ashamed of like, oh, I was a single mom, and like I didn't want that to define me, and that like somehow I was this person who didn't follow like the natural progression of like find someone, get married, have kids, like have a home, and this idea of like what I thought like society expects of you to have like a good life, instead of like kind of letting that like shame define me. I felt like I should use that story to help empower me, because that is who I am today, because of the strength that I found in being a single mom. And then also the support that I had from my family, from my parents and my sister as I was raising my young daughter. And so I think that is one of the big life lessons, and it's a continual journey, motherhood, to figure out who I need to be for them, and to like discover all these things about like how do I help them facilitate their own identity formation, be it like racially, culturally, religiously, that I'm always learning. I'm constantly like looking for ways for me to support that identity formation for them and for myself.
Wow, that's incredible. And I love hearing that. Sometimes I think when people think of marriage, I think, oh, our problems are going to go away. But for you, you're like, no, I am going to address this head on. This is not a healthy relationship. I want to have a better life for my daughter. And, it didn't just get you to bring her to a better place, but it brought, she motivated you to put yourself in a better place. And like you said, find your own joy and really overcome those mental blocks of like Catholic guilt and shame. And so I just want to applaud you for that. And I'm sure that probably already feels like a lifetime ago.
Yes.
Yes. But I think that's incredible, because sometimes like like, for me, I was with my ex for 6 or 7 years. And part of why I stayed with him at the time was because I lost my virginity to him. And being raised Catholic, I thought, okay, if I give my virginity to someone, I have to be with them forever, even if they're abusive.
Yeah.
I was like, I guess this is it for me. And then when I finally broke it off, like I really had to go through this like mental work of being like, it's okay. It's, that was that probably culturally made sense at whatever time I was taught that, to like be with someone and give, save it for one person and only for one person. But I think I think it also makes you more humbled and empathetic to other people when you've gone through something like that. And I think, throughout this entire interview, you keep bringing up your children, and it really sounds like all the things that you've gone through is to like feed your children with a positive upbringing. And so I think that's really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think it's like, it's for both my children and for myself, because I think a lot of times women can get lost and not know who they are after motherhood. I mean, just growing a human inside your body is just like this life-changing experience. But to redefine who you are as a mother is just like this just total transformation. And I think that it's been both a blessing to learn more about my children and who they are as these little people, but also to learn more about myself in the process.
I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like when I'm not a mother, like I have a dog, but that's about it. I feel like I feel like when you become a mother, or at least go through like some major life change such as that, you almost have like the second chance at life. I think of one of my friends who had, like, I knew her since, I knew her in high school, and she was just an awful person in so many ways. But one day I found her on Facebook, and she changed her last name to her husband's, and she had kids, and all of a sudden she was this very religious, lovely, compassionate woman. And I just thought, man, like I knew you in your former life. And it almost seems like, yeah, having children. I mean, you can tell us, obviously, like, since you're the one with kids here, but like, yeah, it's like, you really have to make, especially if you're a good mother, in my opinion, like you really have to make these decisions. Like, am I going to keep sustaining this old life? Like, are those the way that I have lived, and the mantras and philosophies I lived by, is that going to help my new family and my children and their upbringing? And so I can only imagine, like, it's not just a physical transformation, but it's emotional, mental, spiritual. It's like an everything transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also not that like all of a sudden I give birth in the hospital and I have figured out who I am overnight, because I think it's the actual journey of it. I have a younger sister, and she doesn't have children yet. And I think there's this idea that you have to like be ready and like, mentally and, financially and all these things, that you'll have it all figured out and then you have this baby. But I definitely don't have it all figured out, and I'm figuring it out along the way. And I think that's the whole process, to discover who I am while also being a mother, that I don't have to have all the answers. And in fact, when my daughter asks me a question and I don't know it, that's okay. Like, we can discover it together, because there's no way I could know all the answers to everything in life. I'm still figuring out what it means to be Filipino American, and we'll discover that together.
Yeah, I think that's a good lesson in itself, is that life is really, even if whether you're Filipino or not, life is all about exploration, and not just sitting with whatever stereotypes or childhood beliefs you had. And so, Nani, I'm curious to see if you had any thoughts you wanted to add to this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I, again, don't have kids yet either. And that's kind of like, if you ask me at age 15 where I thought I would be in 5 years, my answer was default, I'll have 2 kids, maybe another one on the way. Of course, expected to be married. And I never really questioned that until, now here I am at 27, and none of that has happened. And so that's kind of what sparked this whole exploration for me, is, if that's not what I'm here to do, what is my purpose? And that's I guess you can go through that before or after motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well said. Well, I can't believe this, but we have all been talking for about 45 minutes now, maybe an hour, including the pre-recording. And I think this is a good time to kind of wrap up. And for anyone that's listening, if this resonates with you in any way, we'd love to hear from you. You can actually visit our show notes and leave us a voice message or email us. But either way, we would love to hear from you and see if this resonated with you in any way. Ria, do you have any closing thoughts or anything else you want to share with our listeners today?
I just want to thank you, Jen, for creating this space and this community for us to share our stories. And I'm excited to hear more from the other women who you'll be interviewing. And I just appreciate that there's a space for us to share our stories and to hear others, because in doing that, we're learning more about ourselves. So thank you.
Oh, well, it's my absolute pleasure. And it helps me too, selfishly.
Right.
Yeah, I think
we're all here for that same reason.
Exactly. It's really just, like I mentioned, this project started for me because around Christmas time, I was in this place. I had been fairly involved, and I was in and out of the Filipino community since college when I first joined this Filipino organization. And part of why I was in and out of it is because I had this love-hate relationship with the community. And that's a conversation for another time. But I got to a place where I was like, what is it? And I realized I had to look within and then really ask the question, well, who am I? Like, who am I why do I have this conflicting relationship with the Filipino community? Well, maybe I haven't really addressed who I am as a Filipino American woman, and having very minimal resources. I mean, other than maybe like textbooks or something that I didn't really want to read, I was like, I have to find another way. And as we all know, facts tell, but stories sell. And I wanted to be drawn in and learn about my history through oral history, really. And so that's how the project came about. And then, I had to take a break for a year. Whole other story for another time. But but thank you for saying that because it feeds me as well. It helps me a lot to hear everyone else's stories. And so I just want to thank you both. Nani, thank you so much for co-hosting with me. Any final words from you?
No, that was a good first try for me.
Yeah, you did great.
Yes, you did.
Thank you, Ria, for sharing.
Yes. And if anyone wants to follow Ria, she is on Instagram at Urban Ohana. Ria, why don't you explain why you chose that? To me, it makes sense. It's like, it's this islander girl in the city. Yeah. That's how I interpret it. So why don't you
definitely.
Yeah. So did I get it right? I did get it right. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And Ohana, well, from Lilo and Stitch, like that idea that where no one gets left behind, that's really like how I could describe my family, that we just, we're always there for each other and no one gets left behind. And my sister and I have that tattooed. So, I just kind of had to use that as a handle.
You're like, I got no choice, but it's a great name.
Thanks.
No, I love it. So to our listeners, if you want to follow Ria, you can find her on Urban Ohana on Instagram. And I'm sure she can tell you more about what she's up to and what she does in her day-to-day and at her job at the college or at the University of Chicago. And with that said, I want to thank you both so much for your time. Thank you so much, Nani, and thank you so much, Ria. And I look forward to growing this community together. And if we have some listeners calling in and asking some follow-up questions, hopefully we'll have Ria back on the show again in the future. So thank you both so much. And I hope you both have a great evening, and to our listeners as well.
Thank you.
You as well. See you next time.
And there you have it, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories and life lessons told by the Filipino American woman. If you're interested in sharing your story, please contact us at thefilipinoamericanwoman@gmail.com or find us on Instagram at thefilipinoamericanwoman. Until next time.